A good evening and a warm welcome to everyone. It's the 15th of September 2020, just gone past 8 o'clock in the United Kingdom. Very warm welcome to everyone listening and watching wherever you may be. Welcome to Pendle Radio as well and our MEDtalkx, which is a regular feature, usually between 8 to 9 p.m. My name is Fahim Shakur, and along with my co-host Mehran Javed, we have another special guest with us this evening. Tonight we are talking about autistic spectrum disorder, autism, Asperger's, all of these conditions. The phone numbers for any questions you may have and the WhatsApp number are 01282 723 455. I repeat, 01282 723 455, and the WhatsApp number is 075 22 723 455. If you have any questions, queries on this topic related to the subject matter tonight, please do not hesitate to get in touch. Over to you, Mehran.
Thank you, Fahim, and thank you again, Khurram, for joining us. You may have recognized him from our MEDtalkx show back in August, covering social media and its interaction with mental health. So as you know, Dr. Khurram Sadiq is a prominent professional in his field. I've known him from previous encounters, but he's also a consultant psychiatrist in the Northwest region. Does his own YouTube-related activity, but he's also got a vested interest in terms of, he's got lots of experience that we can certainly understand and share knowledge about autism spectrum disorder. So just for the audience, just be mindful that this is just for information, but if this sparks an interest or a conversation that you think needs to be made, then do speak to your GP, as well as, there are mental health services available to support you through that journey. So, Khurram, when we talk about autism, what does it mean? Because there's lots of terms being used at the moment.
Oh, yes. I think at the moment, the umbrella term that is being used is autism spectrum disorder. And till 2013, we used to be referring people with autism, Asperger's, pervasive developmental disorder, Rett syndrome. But now it has become an umbrella term. An umbrella term means that what they have said is that the process of assessment is the same for all these conditions. This is a condition in which you have a person has social communication difficulties, social interaction problems, and there are some repetitive, rigid, and stereotypical behavior that does impact on person's life. So nowadays, the term that is the politically term, correct term is autism spectrum disorder.
Great, and I guess you also have experience about dual diagnosis.
Yes.
So where does autism spectrum disorder sit when we think around its interactions or correlations with other mental disorders? Because I think autism spectrum disorder, again, it's a very it used to be considered a very rare condition not so long ago. Like if you go back in time 10, 15 years ago, it used to be considered one in 10,000. And nowadays, the recent studies suggest 1 in 56 to 1 in 59, so which is very common. It's not that it has spread; it's about the awareness and people and the professionals picking that conditions up, so we become more aware of it. Now, with regards to the comorbidities, I think the most common comorbidities is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the ADHD. I think which is there in about 30% of the cases. Then you do get depression, anxiety. A lot of the patient, and Fahim, you would know that from your experience from GP, that a lot of people who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, they are initially deemed as having social anxiety and anxiety issues, and sometimes like they come with personality issues as well. And some people might think that their presentation comes across as psychotic in nature, which actually is not. So all these conditions plus depression is quite common in autism spectrum disorder, especially if it is undiagnosed, because all their life people think as to what is going on with them. Why so they're different? Why are they like an alien on Mars? Whereas everybody else is doing something else and they are doing something else, and the outcome is completely different of their actions. So these are some common comorbidities that you will come across.
Excellent. And Khurram, we've talked about some associations with ASD and other things, but actually let's get to the meat of it. How do you get assessed for this? If you're an adult and you suspect you may have ASD, what is the actual the pathway that you need to follow in order to get diagnosed?
Okay. I think before I answer this question, I think I missed on one point, and that is intellectual disability, which was commonly known as a learning disability. While we were growing up and I entered medicine, for me, autism was about learning disability. People who have, who at that time used to be called mentally retarded, learning disability, now intellectual disability. But if you look closely, there is very few cases, like I think around 15 to 20% of the cases, or probably less than that, who have got intellectual disability with autism. So that's one important point, that autism does not mean intellectual disability. That is a point to ponder about, and the point to remember. The other thing is, you asked me about the processes. Unfortunately, the transition services, when it comes to adult services, they are few and far between. I think there are regions within the United Kingdom where there's rarely any ASD, autism spectrum disorder services, whereas during the childhood, the CAM services, child and adolescent mental health services, they do have quite good ADHD and autism spectrum disorder services. The process to be referred is if there is an autism spectrum disorder service which is run by NHS, to go through the GP, and they will refer you over to that service. And if there isn't, and one is desperate to know what is going on with him, then the other route is the private route. You can have that. Like I don't feel comfortable saying that this is the route, but I work most of the time in NHS and part-time in private. And I work with certain organizations who have cut down the waiting list by years, not even months or weeks. Like the 4 years of waiting list done in 3 or 4 months or 5 months, because they're organizations which are commissioned by NHS now, who are meant to take care of the autism spectrum disorder patient. But if you're looking specifically for NHS-driven services, they will be few and far between, unfortunately.
Okay, and why does it take so long to get a diagnosis? A lot of people wait many months or years to get a diagnosis. Is this something that you found, Khurram?
I think it is about the waiting list. The waiting list. The process is quite long. The process is about triaging, getting different sources of information. For example, if it is a child you're looking at, 7 or 8 years old, so you need to have information from school, you need to have parents' reports. Then there will be a 2-step process, 3-step process. First, the triage. They will initially find the presenting complaints, and then they will go through a process which is a kind of a scale that they apply to identify or to make sense of it, which is known as ADOS. It is Autism Direct Observation System, so ADOS, and it is about creating a social environment for a child so that 2 psychologists or 3 psychologists can observe them doing different things, and it is very structured. Once the assessment is done for ADOS, then the second process is to get the developmental history from the parents, and I'm talking about the child, and bringing all the information gathered from different sources and create a kind of a collage out of it, and then try to fit it into 3 different domains, like social interaction, communication, and stereotypical and rigid behaviors. And then one comes to get to the bottom of it. You have the concluding session. So that alone, that one assessment, can take up to 4 to 6 weeks for a person. And I'm talking about children's services who are quite good in picking up autism spectrum disorder conditions. But when you come to the adults, sometimes it is difficult, because you won't be able to find any collateral information, because they'll be living alone. Parents will be deceived. They're not talking terms, or parents are overseas, or parents are somewhere else, and you cannot get hold of them to get the information. So you have to rely a lot on what is going on. So sometimes supplementary information, like information from the workplace or information from friends, can be really helpful in that condition. So the whole process is set in a way that it is quite time consuming itself.
So if we take a step back, Khurram, obviously there's a process. So, but how do you identify that there's actually a need there? What do people need to be aware of to think, oh, maybe my child or my brother or sister is suffering from ASD?
I think the red flags, it is, in children, it is quite good if it is diagnosed early, for example, as early as 6 years or 7 years, or like up to 14 or 15 years. That is the most important period, because what we have to recognize is that if you keep a child with autism spectrum disorder in the same environment, for example, they stay at home and they stay at home for the rest of their lives, you will never be able to pick autism spectrum disorder, because they are used to those conditions. You don't see any flares, you don't see any meltdowns. It's about the change. It's about the transitions. That transition from home to nursery, nursery to primary, primary to middle, and then the bigger jump, the middle to secondary. It is absolutely unstructured. And the whole world falls apart because they're so used to structure and used to organization that they just fall apart. And then the next stage is to sixth form, and then to university, and then employment. But as you grow along, as you walk along the timeline, it becomes more structured. And these are the phases, and these are the transitions where they emerge. In children, I think mothers, they're quite good at picking it up, and I like it's so unfortunate because I see autism spectrum disorder. I do the autism spectrum disorder assessment across the timeline, right from a child who's 3 or 4 years of age till somebody who's 70 or 75 years of age. And the most important thing is that they have been fighting. The parents have been fighting the system for so long. Like I can tell you examples like 6 years, 8 years, going to the doctors, going to the school, going to the nursery and telling, there's something not right with my kid. Can you please look into that? And most of the time they're declined. So the things that to be looking at is eye contact, change, response to change, play, how they interact, how they make contact, how friendly they are or how not friendly they are. Plus altercations out of nowhere, like simple nursery in a play area, they would create altercations. But one has to understand, because we have to do the ABC, the antecedent behavior and the consequence. You have to go back, trace back the footstep as to what started it. Because unless you do that, you won't be able to understand why is it happening. Because a lot of the time, these kind of things are deemed as behaviors. Children being naughty, parents, especially mothers, are blamed for it. Like we're talking about that era where mothers used to be called refrigerated mothers. And because of those refrigerated mothers were blamed for causing autism in their children. That was a term that used to define those mothers of children who had autism or autism spectrum disorder. So these are the things to be very off, lining up the things, they're big at organization. What you have to remember is they have imagination, but they have imagination about things that they know about. So you have to physically tell them about it. Once they know about it, they will be absolutely creative about those situations, but they have to know those situations. So many times you'll hear this, that my child does not play. He does not pretend play. He just picks up themes from television programs. He picks up themes from the movies he has watched or seeing other children play with it and kind of replicate it. And every time he plays or she plays, it's the same thing over and over and over again. They would line things up, organize it by size, by color. And for them, it will be about the possession of things. The memory is so amazing that if you move anything, even they're not looking at it, they'll turn around, they'll say, somebody has touched my stuff. So these are the things that one has to be wary of. And mothers are quite good at doing it because they spend most of the time, the kids spend most of the time around that age with their mothers. So mothers know that there's something not right. And unfortunately, it's the system that is letting them down. believe me or not, I have seen people burst into tears, adults, once they come to know that they've got autism spectrum disorder, not because that they didn't want it, because that it's a burden off their chest. Now they know the reason why they are like this, the reason they think this way, the reason they do things a different way. And parents like bursting into tears, hugging me, thanking me in so many different ways. Like the feeling once you see the parents, it's so satisfying to you that you have done something good by giving them the right answer, an answer they had been fighting for years and years and years.
I just want to try and bring a statement from Nick, who's one of our YouTube viewers. So he's actually said social anxiety was his first diagnosis, and then depression the next.
Yes.
Is this what the issue is? Because I guess someone waits a long time, but is it the fact that there's inefficient assessments or lack of understanding and how to share information, I guess? Because if you don't know what to pick and share, then...
Yeah, exactly. Like, eyes can't see what the mind does not know. So you have to know things first. I think the problem with the system is, like, Mehran, you have been a psychiatric trainee for him, you have been a GP training. How many times were we actually taught about autism spectrum disorder? How many times were we trained about it? We were not. We were left on our own accord. Like, main thing was for us, depression, anxiety, psychotic disorder, bipolar. With children, it was a very specific condition, ADHDs. But with ASD, like, there was nothing, literally nothing. People who have learned, they have learned on their own accord. They had interest, or some of them because they had the condition themselves, hence they became interested in those conditions, and they excelled at that. So the problem with the system is not that it's an it's an inefficiency. It's about not knowing. When the professionals don't know about it, how can we blame the education system, the schools? How can we blame the employers when we ourselves are missing on so much chunk of information? When I was working in Manchester in CMHT, like literally every week, I was a psychiatrist who was referring the most cases to the next autism spectrum disorder services. In my one year, I think probably I referred about 100 cases and misdiagnosed with what? Psychotic disorder, managed on the least antipsychotic medication. And the moment you go to them, you walk with them, you take them to a room, I would know that this is not psychosis, this is something else. I would touch upon psychosis and I'll go to autism spectrum disorder, and 99.9% of the times, it was right. So it's not about the system, it's about educating the professionals. I think bringing in the curriculum so that we are educated properly about it, we are trained properly, so that we are able to pick up those conditions early.
I think just to add to that, Fahim, if I may, yeah, you're right. In terms of psychiatry training, you choose what kind of placements you want. I had 6 months in child and adolescent mental health, so you do see a little bit, and you do get to observe how the ADOS works. But as you said, not everyone has that experience, and a lot of it's driven personally in terms of your own needs and requirements. Obviously, there's exams and things like that, but that's not the benchmark that one has to meet. So yeah, over to you, Fahim. You're about to say something.
Yeah, Khurram, so obviously it's important that we support people with autism when we come across them, because I guess they may be at higher risk of being exploited, either people accessing their money or accommodation, or in the film, everyone knows Rain Man. He was a savant, a type of autism, and just took him, didn't they, to the casinos and just utilized him for his form of intelligence, although that was exploitation, although I maybe didn't realize at the time. And obviously with the social distancing guidelines, and that might cause an issue. Can you give us some ways that I think people with ASD are being affected by COVID now, and how we can support them?
Yeah, I think it is for them, for autism spectrum disorder, the thing is about an order, about an organization. It's about routine. So all of a sudden with COVID, it completely fell apart. Like, I've seen mothers who have complained about it, that it's so difficult to contain their child because they don't understand why they're not going to the school. Why isn't there a structure? Why isn't that the school is on? What if there's a virus? What is the reason behind it? But again, the thing, the way to deal with it is to give them as much information as possible, a structured information, give them a reason, and explain it to them in the simplest possible way, because they are very direct, they're very black and white. They cannot read between the lines. So those are the things, like with children, those were the things. With again, with adults, I've seen a few adults while I was working with the home treatment team coming with crisis, and the same complaint was structure, loss of structure. They would be very contained in their environment, in their high functioning environment. All of a sudden, they have to work from home, and they cannot structure it together because they have not been in that situation. The structure is completely lost, and when the structure is lost, they become more anxious. They become more, their mood changes, their mood variation. People become depressed, become suicidal. And I have seen that in this COVID era, because I'm working in the home treatment team, so kind of the front line is for it. So the structure was the most important thing. As a result of that, there were some psychotic relapses as well. There were depressive episodes. There were anxiety, proper panic attacks as a result of being homebound and not having a structure. But you have to, but again, the thing is, you have to, you make sense of it. Since I've started working with my home treatment team, I have trained them in screening autism spectrum disorder and ADHD. The skills that I have passed it on to the team, and they're now so good at picking it up. Like we diagnose at least 5, 6, or 7 patients every week with autism spectrum disorder and refer them for further formal assessments.
And in terms of the media and how it's portrayed, I mentioned Rain Man, but that's not a typical autistic spectrum disorder. I mean, that's a savant, and obviously there's others, people who watch Netflix. There's the Speed Cube, is about the Rubik's Cube, who can do that in quick time. And one of the actual main characters there, he actually has autism, and it shows how sometimes he finds it difficult, but they're trying to help his social skills by meeting people at these things. What do you think of the way it's portrayed and how we should help them on the main stage like this?
I think it is very stereotypical. You see two ends of the spectrum. One is people who have got intellectual disabilities. If you ask them, for example, if you ask people about autism spectrum disorder, I work a lot in Pakistan with autism kids, and the one thing that is common, the common theme is, yes, that they might be suffering from a learning disability, which is not the case. They are very bright kids. And then on the other spectrum, we see the savant, the kind of higher functioning that you used to call Asperger's in the past, high functioning autism spectrum disorder. So there's a lot of stereotypes, and we have to break those stereotypes slowly and gradually by educating the public about it, by educating our own doctors, and by educating the multiple professionals that we come across, nurses, social workers, occupational OTs. So all of those professionals need to be educated and need to be taught about this. Otherwise, the stereotypes will not go away. I think you'll be surprised how difficult it is, or how the stereotypes is so embedded in the communities. Like I do at least 30 to 40 autism assessments on a fortnight basis. And the kind of things I come across and the kind of behaviors that I come across from different systems, it's absolutely unbelievable. And the way forward is to educate them about it. And don't get me wrong, they are very gifted children. Like they're very true, they are very soulful, they're brilliant at things that they know. And like for me, they are the actual superhumans amongst us. Once they get onto something and once they want to do something, they will excel in that area. People, for example, I have seen 6-year-old, 7-year-old watching David Attenborough's Blue Planet and excelling, knowing more about nature probably than anybody else who is doing a master's in that particular field. Or if they get their head around something, if they develop a niche area, then they will excel in that niche area of theirs. So they are quite good that way. But again, it's again very we should not be creating stereotypes here. For them, the problem is that they don't know the skills, they don't understand the skills, they cannot read body languages, they cannot spot people's emotion, they cannot read people's emotions, and hence they behave the way they behave. If we provide a conducive environment to them where social skill training is rampant, where we provide parents the training, where the school educate them about the social skills and the emotional skills, they'll excel rapidly. And as they will be made aware of it, as they go along, as they grow old, they will pick up those skills and they will become very skillful, not natural, but skillful in dealing with day-to-day situations.
So, Khurram, the difficulty I have is we know this and we've been championing it for a long time, but if we just focus purely on the educational system, the need, I guess, is a very much, this is a very standardized approach. You've got to try and fit into this environment as opposed to the environment needs to change according to that individual. Mm-hmm. So I guess the simple things about, commands or questions being short, using visual cues, giving them time, understanding their own worldview, because I think the difficulty is it's not about them not understanding what's happening. It's just we're not able to understand.
We're not able to, absolutely. And I think the small things like that, Rob, with regards to the change, you have got the whole world in Google. What you can do is, I tell the parents, if you're going on holiday, show them the hotel, show them where you're going to go. If you're meeting somebody, show them the picture of the people, show them their house, show them the car they have, the rooms they have, ask them so that they are prepared. Once they are prepared for what they're going to see, I think their behavior do come down as well, and they're more amenable and they become more conducive, and they learn more in those situations. For example, having a visual, you mentioned about visual timetable, creating a visual timetable with pictures, showing them what they have to do on a daily basis. And if you have to incorporate a routine, you incorporate it into that visual timetable and tell them about it and prepare them about it, and it becomes part of their routine. For example, if you want them to go to supermarket with them, or if you want to go out for a walk with them, then you have to incorporate it, give them information, give them knowledge about it, and you'll see that they do so well. I remember one of my acquaintances calling me. She had a child who was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder back in Pakistan, and she was talking about the tantrums and the behaviors that the child was having. And I told her one thing. I told her about the change, how to prepare the child for the change, how to use the visual timetable. 2 weeks later, she called me and said, he's not having any tantrums at all. He is becoming so much better. So small tweaks in day-to-day life can make such a big difference for a child.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think there's lots of interaction on YouTube. I think Nick, he does talk about the stereotypes, changes, and need for updates. What are these stereotypes, and what do we need to do as clinicians to try and address them? Because you will encounter some of these issues on a professional level as well as, I guess, personal level.
Yeah, again, the stereotypes are about people with autism. They are intellectually disabled. They have got intellectual disability. The other side of the spectrum is they are geniuses. They are born geniuses. They can do wonders. People, movies like Rain Man, I think has become an icon to represent them. I think there have been a lot of nice movies. Like there was a series called Atypical, again showing a family with an autism spectrum disorder child. Creating those stereotypes, I think it is up to us to educate. It's important for us to educate the public and to go into the communities, talk about autism spectrum disorder, because believe me, the more you go into the communities, the more things you will come across. For example, for me, one of the biggest challenge was when I started autism spectrum disorder, started to do assessments and start to develop expertise was about autism and MMR vaccines. Like that used to be a controversial topic, and then I started reading about it and how I came to know that a smaller study, a sample of 7 or 9 patients that was not even properly sampled, was presented to Lancet, and Lancet accepted that study, only to realize later that that was a fraudulent study and the person lost the GMC re- registration as a result of that. And plus, as a result of that, there were 2 further studies that was done, massive studies. One was done in Manchester and London together, and that was a sample of 600 to 700 patients. But there was another Scandinavian study which had a sample of around 20 to 30,000 patients, and they showed that there's no link between autism and MMR. And as a result of that, anti-vax, like I'm a member of a few groups for autism spectrum disorder across the globe, and the kind of things that I come across, and if I try to put my point across, like it is, I'm trawled to my bones, because there are anti-vax who believe in these things, who have read about it, their mothers, their parents, who have been who are actually made to believe that this is a real thing, and their research is about very specificities of that vaccine, and how a certain element in that vaccine can react with your body, but not in its entirety. So plus there's a new thing about microbiomes and autism. A lot of people, like, this is again a new theme that has emerged, especially in North America, because they have developed doctors called MAP doctors. They are holistic medicine doctors who believe that change in the flora of the gut has got something to do with autism spectrum disorder. Although there has been studies done, and none of the study has been conclusive. Nothing has come out of it, apart from there has not many changes between the controls and the active group. But still, they believe in that, and they have created this group of doctor called the MAPS doctor, and who are the holistic medicine doctor, and they talk to you about how to control your diet, how to control your flora, and how mutation that have happened in the gut has happened in the brain, and how it is interlinked. But there's no scientific evidence to support that.
I'm glad you mentioned all that, Khurram. That's really important. And I want to reiterate that autism is not caused by bad parenting, vaccines such as the MMR vaccine, or diet, or an infection you can spread to other people. And I think that's particularly important with a lot of vaccine trials going on at the moment. And sometimes some of these things come to the surface. So it's really good that you've spent some time doing that, Khurram. I want to move on slightly to the concept of learning disabilities and in a broader sense, and autism. I mean, there is also dyslexia, dyspraxia, specific learning disabilities, and how do they actually coalesce, or perhaps even as part of a Venn diagram? Are they interlinked at all with any of this?
Yeah, I think I spoke about intellectual disabilities, like 10 to 20% of people who have got autism spectrum disorder, they do have moderate to severe to profound intellectual disabilities. At the same time, dyspraxia and dyslexia, once we're doing the ASD assessment, we do touch upon these, like the fine motor skills or the gross motor skill, the balancing issues that a person has, the ability to use cutlery, the handwriting, the pencil grip. All of that is covered in autism spectrum disorder. We touch on it, and if we find that there's something not right, then we write in the report that a dyspraxia assessment for dyspraxia or dyslexia needs to be done. And so many times, like in schools, children have been writing, but they were unable to differentiate between P and Q and B and D, and they were doing the writing in an inverted manner. But the school just shrugged it off because they didn't want to get into that state where they had to deploy some funding. So many schools are like this, who, even knowing that there's something not right, because they're having lack of resources, and the processes are very tiring. So they don't let the parents, or they don't indulge themselves in the processes itself. But dyslexia, we do assess them superficially during ASD assessments, and if we find that there is some connection, there is something going on, then we refer them, or we ask the GP to refer them for these assessments.
Excellent. And I would add that obviously if it's a child, then it's a health visitor sometimes if they're under age 5, and there are other people, and also the special educational needs coordinator, SENCO in schools. They're all different ways to try and get a diagnosis. Yeah. I wanted to just mention something that was recently in the news, Khurram, that you may have come across. There was a 13-year-old boy in America, in Salt Lake City, with autism, who was recently shot by the police. Not quite sure exact details, but this was really upsetting to all of us who came across this. And I know, obviously, we've got viewers and listeners in the USA. I mean, from what I can ascertain, obviously investigations are still going on, but it seemed like a mental health crisis. And how would you de-escalate things, I guess, Khurram, is what I'm getting at. What's the process of de-escalating so something like this doesn't happen again ever anywhere in the world?
I think it's a difficult proposition. It's a difficult task, because when you're talking about the police, and when talking about the services, for example, the emergency services, I think they're not well trained in picking up those things at all, especially police. Like, I know that we do some kind of training in mental health trust with the police, but that is very basic training to teach them about picking them on a 136. But in an environment, or in a locality, for example, in USA, it's a different ball game altogether. Police have got more rights. They're more weaponized. There's a lot of paranoia around different kind of things, and it all plays up together. So again, for me, the basic step is about breaking those stereotypes, educating the public, educating the professionals, educating people who come in contact with these patients. For example, the take-home message from this is that the police have to be trained in different, at least basically, in some kind of situations, or at least to be able to pick the basic mental health condition in people, and not to consider them as behaviors, and not to consider them as people not abiding with the laws of the country or the laws of the state.
I think just to add to that, we're getting some feedback just through our YouTube channel. Just still not too sure who actually called for help, whether it was a mother or their own kind of social service system. But clearly, the police were first responders to that situation, and that should never happen.
Exactly,
and like
exactly,
should never happen.
Should never happen. Exactly, because in here, the first responders invariably are ambulance services. If a call like this goes out, it's usually the ambulance services that comes out first.
Yeah. And getting some more questions. I know it's kind of taking us back a little, because we have and I guess for the viewers and listeners, I know we are using some terminology. So CMHT stands for Community Mental Health Team in the UK. 136 is part of the Mental Health Act. So police have powers to take a person that they're concerned about their mental health to a place of safety. It's usually to the hospital, or it could be to a police station, for example. So just to give some background on those kind of things. But one of the questions was around ADHD, and how is that different to autism spectrum disorder? That's one of the questions from one of our listeners.
Okay, I think ADHD, again, it depends if it is in child or if it is in adults. In children, it is at times it is difficult to diagnose, because the tools that are used to assess, there's a lot of overlap between a lot of symptoms. For example, inattention in ADHD is a very common theme, and inattention in ASD is a theme, but the background of both is different. Inattention in ADHD is about not able to complete one task, moving from one task to another, even if the task is quite close to a person's heart, or if it's the favorite thing to do, they won't be sticking to it for more than 10-15 minutes. Whereas in autism spectrum disorder, the inattention is, if they're not interested in something, then they would not do that at all. But if they're interested, they'll spend hours and hours and hours. Possibly, if you leave it to them, they'll spend days doing those kind of activities. So again, you have to get to the bottom of it. You should not be stuck in the superficialities of the assessment, because I at times I do the dual assessment. I do the ADHD and ASD assessment in one particular session, and it is quite challenging for me, because there are a lot of overlaps. There's a lot of hyperactivity in ADHD, but again, there is some kind of stereotypical movements in autism spectrum disorder. So sometimes those stereotypical movements appear to be as a symptom of hyperactivity in those kids, to a person who does not know the difference between ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. It happens a lot in the GP practices as well, because they are unable to differentiate, because they're not specialized services. Again, with the ADHD, once they go into the adult phase, I think it's one of the dangerous things to happen to an adult, or adolescent, because if it is undiagnosed and they try to keep themselves calm by using a lot of recreational substances, alcohol, they rely a lot of that because it calms them down. Cocaine is particularly one thing which calms them quite a lot, which is for us is sometimes a litmus test, because we ask them about the impact of drugs on their system, and they say that sometimes it seems strange, but when I take cocaine, everybody is through the roof, and we are sitting calmly because it's a stimulant. It's like taking Ritalin, and to keep them calm and to have them focus. Plus, criminal justice system, if you look at the forensic population, 30 to 50% of them, they have got either ADHD or autism spectrum disorder. So for me, ADHD, there's a quick response required, because if we are late and if we are delayed in diagnosing people with ADHD, then, for example, in certain areas, the waiting list is 5 years, 7 years. In Liverpool, it is 7 years. For Manchester, unofficially, it is 10 years. It's like not having a service. In those 10 years, most of the people who have been referred, you won't be able to locate them, because either they have moved places, either they are into drugs, either they're in these forensic settings because of things that they have done. And we need, just like in psychosis, we need early response. For ADHD, we also need very quick response, and for them to be initiated on medication. But in kids, coming back to the question, there's a lot of overlap between autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, because of a few things that I told you about. And in adolescent and in adulthood, it's a different thing. They are misdiagnosed with emotionally unstable personality disorders. They are misdiagnosed with having antisocial personality disorder, whereas the impulsivity in EUPD, ADHD, and antisocial personality disorder is completely different.
I think we'll need you back for another show on ADHD as well. I don't want to get. Yeah, I think that's needed. There's a lot of questions coming in on that topic. I don't want to get too distracted from ASD. There was one about learning disabilities again, though, and it's from one of our regular listeners, Khurram, if you can take that. And they said that, why would there be a higher rate of dyslexia and dyspraxia in ASD compared to the general population? Is there any easy answer for that?
I think it's to do with the frontal lobe. It is to do with the frontal lobe functioning. It's about how the brain and the synapses work in a child who has got autism spectrum disorder, because at least 80% of the kids that I have come across, they do have either dyspraxia or dyslexia as a result of that. It is a lot to do with the frontal lobe conditions that they have, or the way the frontal lobe has developed in autism spectrum disorder.
We're getting a lot more feedback. This is from Shazzy Asmi saying, great MEDtalk show, guys. If you're watching, please do like and subscribe to our channel. Very much appreciated. Getting more questions. So this is from Omar Azat, just saying he wasn't too sure if it's been covered, but any data on the importance of diagnosing ADHD in adulthood. And I guess this is something quite personal to me, because I actually see this presenting in memory services. So, which is, technically should be reserved for later life, but, because a lot of memory services are now ageless. So, so it's really interesting. What can you say to Omer on that, Khurram?
On the data?
I guess the importance of diagnosing ADHD in adulthood.
I think the importance is about saving a life and changing the direction of a person. That's what I believe in. This is what ADHD medication can do for a person, especially if they're severely unwell. And again, just like autism spectrum disorder, they are misdiagnosed with so many other conditions. And I remember one of my mentors in ADHD. He worked in Liverpool, Dr. Peter Mason, big name, and he came up with a theory that a lot of ADHD, they do suffer from psychotic symptoms, and it is because of the stress of trying to be attentive and try to control the impulsive and the hyperactivity, and sometimes giving them Ritalin and stimulants in psychosis while they're suffering, while they have got ADHD, it actually brings the psychosis down because the stress level reduces. And there's a podcast on Royal College of Psychiatrists on this very subject, psychosis and ADHD. So for me, importance of ADHD is just as much as it is diagnosing somebody with a psychotic disorder and starting them on the medication, because you can save so many lives and you can change the direction of the person.
Yeah, I fully agree. I was going to ask you about BAME. It's very much in the news at the moment, and I guess rightly so. But if we think about individuals who from a BAME background, and I use the terminology BAME with a heavy heart because it's not acceptable from a lot of people, especially if they're from dual heritage, for example. So what are the challenges for those individuals when it comes to being assessed for autism spectrum disorder?
I think the problem is that there is this denial that there's no autism. Like I know people from BAME background and they said, no, my kid does not have autism spectrum disorder. They started suing the services, challenging the service, and they do that all the time. They want to find the reason, but they don't want autism spectrum disorder to be the reason, to be one of the reasons for that. So there's a lot of reluctance and there's a lot of and denial around accepting a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, especially in our BAME community. And one of the reasons is because the societies or the BAME cultures have not been properly educated around this, and that this is something that can exist anywhere. 1 in 59 can be anybody, can literally anybody. You cannot pick color, creed, caste, and there's no role in it. But I think, again, the thing is about educating those, going into communities, for example, for going into mosques and talking to them about it. I think that's one area where they might be very receptive once you go there. If you arrange something, I did a session on depression and anxiety in one of the mosques, and people were receptive because it was about the sanctity as to where I was in that. But BAME community, again, has to be educated about it. I'm stressing about psychoeducation. I'm stressing about education because that is the key. Recognition is the key. Acceptance is the key. Knowing that it exists and knowing that it can happen and knowing that it can happen to people around you is the key to it. And
I guess for services to also be aware that there are barriers for those individuals to access those kind of services, that there are also communication problems between parents to professionals, and that can certainly be a challenge. I would like to, we have Sean Yang, who has kindly joined from California. Hello, Sean.
Sorry, guys. I'm trying to
get my
camera.
I think you need to just flip the camera around.
Yeah.
Hi, Sean. Welcome. Just while you get the camera ready, I'm just going to ask Khurram a question. Khurram, in terms of obviously what we've been talking about, and Mehran led into it quite easily with the BAME community, but there are many communities, various communities who may struggle. And prior to this show, I was speaking to a good friend of mine who works in the third sector, and he said he sometimes works with people, families with autism in the family, and the parents sort of just don't let that person or child socialize with other children. There seems to be some sort of a stigma. How can we actually help the stigma and break it down? What can we do, Khurram?
Like in terms of sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, so in terms of sometimes with people with ADHD and autistic spectrum disorder, they may actually struggle, the families, to actually get them to socialize, or they don't want them to socialize, and there's a sort of a stigma as in keeping them away from other children or keeping them away from other families. How do we actually help to basically teach the families to integrate the kids and the family members in society?
I think once the parental skills training, I think it's done by Bernardo's. That's the starting point. They do specific parental training for kids who have got autism spectrum disorder, and especially in our communities, it is a problem, especially a stigma attached to it, because they don't want to expose the children. They don't want to accept it because it will have an implication on their relationship with other families or amongst the relatives, or what they'll say about it. Like, people are so worried about other people saying things about them, and I think it is something which is very embedded in our societies. Again, reaching them through mosque, or reaching them through their own community center, reaching them through their own doctors, people who work with them very closely. That can create a link that might help to bring the barriers down.
Excellent. Mehran, can you introduce our guest?
Yes, thank you, Sean.
There we go.
We did start slightly early, so we just cracked on, really. But thank you so much for dialing in through, to join us on this topic of autism. You are in California, so I fully understand the differences with time, etc. But you're an individual who's very much running for office for the school board. In terms of your history, you have a degree in business management, as well as run your own small business firm, and you have a family of 4 children. And clearly the reason why you're so important for this discussion is about your own carer experience on autism. So we've very much talked about autism spectrum disorder, what are the challenges, and clearly there's many. But I would like to hear more from you, Sean, in terms of what were the difficulties that you encountered when we were talking about autism.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Dr. MJ. Are we live now? Just curious.
Yes, we are. Yes.
Oh, we are. Okay. Yeah. So hi everyone. I just want to do a quick shout out, greeting everyone. Yeah, my name is Sean Yang, and I'm a candidate for Elk Grove Unified School District for District 3 here in Elk Grove, California, right next to Sacramento. So my experience it's an experience that is pretty new, because our younger son has been diagnosed initially with the speech delay, and we've been working with the Sacramento County in terms of having session to help him out for a year last year. But this year, since he's turning 3, as a matter of fact, he's turning 3 tomorrow. But if your kids are turning 3, then the school district, especially the one in Elk Grove that we are living in, they will have a assessment to diagnose your kid to see if he's autism kids or not. And our kids has been diagnosed as a moderate autism. which that means is that they have, my understanding is that they have 3 levels. Level 1, which is very minor, 2 is moderate, and then 3 is severe. So our kids is between 1 and 2. So he has been enrolled in the Elk Grove Unified School District Autism Program, and the intent is that they will help him out from now till he enrolled in kindergarten. And they said that roughly about 95% of the kids who's in his category, by the time he's ready to go to kindergarten, he should recover for the most part. But aside from that, I think our kid, he's you know, what we experience in terms of challenge is really, I think, is certain behavior like tantrum and so forth that is it's common for an autism kid. But you know, a family without autism kids, I think it's a bit you know, new to them, or when they see our kids screaming and yelling, it frustrates them because they think that your kid's just a naughty kid, right? But I think any family who has experience with autism kid, they I think they will get the signal. So for us, I think that first and foremost, the challenging part is accepting that, you know, we have a child who's going to demand a lot of our time and our help, along with that. I think that was difficult, at least for me. I'm sure my wife could have said the same thing. And then just the day-to-day continued work with our kid, of you know, being very mindful that he is an autism kid, and you have to treat him differently, and you have to take your time with him, basically 3 times or 4 times more than how you deal with your other kids. So I think that part of it is very difficult in reality, because he was just diagnosed it last month. So it's a new territory for us. So that's what I have to say for now. Just kind of like the simple answer. If you guys have any specific questions, I would share more.
Yeah, just to follow on from that, Sean. How did the school have to adapt given his diagnosis, and what things had to be put in place to support his education? Oh.
Okay.
Can you come with the first part? I missed the first part.
Yeah, so how did the school have to adapt, Sean, given the diagnosis, and what things did they have to put in place to make sure that, you know, his education was of paramount?
I kind of lost you in the first part. Sorry.
All right. I think we're having some technical issues here. Are you able to hear me okay, Sean? Okay.
Khurram, we're obviously coming near the end of the show, and we always like to get 3 top tips. So can you give some 3 top tips for our listeners and viewers from tonight's show about ASD?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, please do not do not indulge in creating stereotypes for autism spectrum disorder. And the second thing is, once you know that the person has autism spectrum disorder, be very considerate. Be very considerate in how you approach the person, how you talk to the person, and how you treat the person. And the third thing is that the tip. I think the tip is basically to educate. If you have some information, you have some knowledge about it, you should. If you're a doctor, you're not doctor, you're a professional, I think you should start educating people around you who are suffering about this condition, because this is more common than we think it is.
Excellent. No, really good points there. And before we finish, I do want to mention for those people who are affected, if you know someone who may have autism, there's the National Autistic Society. The website is www.autism.org.uk. And they have a number that's available from Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. during this COVID time, I gather, which is slightly different to the regular time schedule. And the phone number is 0808 800 4104. 0808 800 4104. It's been great having you, Khurram, back again.
Thank you so very much.
No, and
thank you, Mehran.
I do want you back for ADHD as well. I know I always try and catch you at the end of the show and ask you. But you can see there's been so many questions and people continue the conversation, and rightly so. Mehran, I'll let you close the evening.
Yeah, no, just thank you again, Khurram, for a really insightful conversation. I think it really comes across the passion, the values, and the need for change. We're hopefully going to keep bringing a variation topics in future, but hopefully next week we're going to be covering immigration and doctors. So the importance of migrants in healthcare. So we're going to have some familiar faces. So let's leave it at that for next week.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, and a very good evening. Thank you so much, Khurram.
Thank you so very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.